The flashlights flickered continuously in the packed press briefing room at the White House. The air was stifling with the breath and murmurs of hundreds of reporters jostling to ask their questions. President Trump stood behind the podium, calmly addressing each query about foreign policy and domestic economic conditions. It was an ordinary press conference, like countless others, until an unusual voice cut through the noisy atmosphere. Mr. President, that voice, strong, clear, and full of determination, silenced the entire room in an instant. The reporters turned their heads, searching for the source of the sound. They saw a black woman standing tall, dressed in a crisply ironed navy blue suit. On her lapel, military medals gleamed under the press room's bright lights. "I am a veteran," she continued, her voice steady, though an undercurrent of emotion resonated in every word. "I served this country for 12 years, and now I can't even find a job to pay my rent." The room fell into complete silence. Even the cameras stopped clicking, as if the reporters were too stunned to remember their duties. Trump adjusted his stance, his gaze fixed intently on the woman. "What will you do to help people like me, Mr. President?" Her question echoed in the stillness of the room. The reporters held their breath, waiting for the president's response. Trump remained silent for a moment, a rare occurrence for him. His usual confidence appeared to falter slightly. "What is your name?" Trump finally spoke, his voice carrying an unusual tone, quieter and more measured than usual. "Danielle Carter, sir." "Danielle," Trump said, as if weighing each syllable carefully. "Can you come up here?" The unexpected invitation set the press room abuzz. Reporters scrambled, adjusting their cameras to capture this rare moment. Danielle stood still for a moment, seemingly uncertain about the unfolding situation. But then, encouraged by the president's gesture, she began to walk forward. Each step Danielle took seemed to resonate in the silence of the room. As she climbed onto the stage, standing beside the most powerful man in the country, the contrast between the two figures became strikingly clear. On one side was the president, dressed in an expensive suit. On the other was the veteran, in a simple yet dignified outfit. "You served this country," Trump said, holding the microphone in his hand, "and for that you have my respect. But let me tell you, your story is not unique. I've heard this many times before. Veterans who gave everything and came back with nothing. That's not fair, and it's not right." Trump paused for a moment, then continued, "But I want to hear it from you, Danielle. Tell everyone here what is really going on." Danielle took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the press room. In front of her was a sea of people with cameras, microphones, and curious gazes. But in that moment, she found a new strength, a strength driven by the truth that needed to be spoken. "I enlisted when I was 18, she began, her voice growing stronger with every word. "I wanted to make a difference, to serve my country. And I did that. I served in Iraq, Afghanistan, places most people wouldn't even dream of stepping foot in." She paused briefly, her breath catching slightly. "But when I came home, I realized the battle wasn't over. Finding a job, getting support, those things were harder than anything I faced overseas. It's as if the moment we take off our uniforms, the world forgets who we are." Danielle's words tore through the polished veneer of political rhetoric often seen in press conferences. She wasn't just speaking for herself, but for thousands of other veterans facing the same struggles. Trump listened intently, a rare seriousness on his face, his eyes reflecting an unusual depth of empathy. Suddenly, Trump stepped away from the podium and moved closer to Danielle. The gesture made the security staff tense, but he paid no mind. "Danielle," he said, his voice firm, "I want you to work with me." The room erupted again, a cacophony of murmurs and gasps. Reporters exchanged bewildered glances as cameras clicked furiously to capture the moment. "You have experience that no one else in this room can claim," Trump continued. "You've been out there. You've seen what's broken. I'm giving you an opportunity to help fix it." Danielle stood there, overwhelmed by the unfolding situation. "You're asking me to help you?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "That's right," Trump replied. "Help me to help them. Let's work together to ensure no veteran has to go through what you've experienced." The press room erupted with a mix of reactions. Some clapped in support, while others murmured with skepticism. Social media immediately exploded with comments, analyses, and debates as reporters scrambled to jot down notes and report on this historic moment. Danielle took a deep breath, regaining her composure. She looked Trump straight in the eye and said, "If this means creating real change for veterans like me, then yes, I accept." As the applause subsided, Danielle felt the weight of the decision she had just made. Images of her old comrades flashed through her mind. Those who had stood by her on the battlefield, those who were now struggling in the civilian life. Their eyes, their stories, all pressed heavily on her shoulders in this moment. Trump looked at Danielle with an unusual expression. Perhaps for the first time in his political career, he saw something beyond the usual calculations. In the woman standing before him, he saw a rare sincerity and courage. The everyday political strategies faded into the background, replaced by a genuine desire to create something meaningful. "Danielle," he said, his voice dropping to a deeper tone, "I know this is not an easy decision, but sometimes destiny calls without warning, and I believe this is one of those moments." The reporters in the room, accustomed to carefully staged political theatrics, suddenly realized they were witnessing something different. There were no cautious, diplomatic answers, no pre-written statements. Instead, it was a genuine dialogue between two people, one wielding the highest power and the other seeking justice. Danielle felt her throat tighten. She thought of the sleepless nights, the rejected job applications, the helplessness of watching her comrades sink into despair. And now, standing before an opportunity to change it all, she couldn't let fear hold her back. "Mr. President," she said, her voice trembling but resolute, "I took an oath to defend this country when I was very young. Today I want to reaffirm that oath in a different way, not with guns and bullets, but with truth and action." Trump nodded, a gesture rarely seen from him, not the agreement of a politician, but the acknowledgement of one human being to another. The reporters in the room, despite being accustomed to political dramas, couldn't help but feel moved by the moment. "Do you see this?" Trump suddenly turned to the crowd of reporters. "This is what America needs. Not empty promises, but people who are willing to stand up, face the truth, and act for what is right." In that moment, the press room was no longer a place of sharp questions and calculated answers. It had become a witness to a commitment between people, transcending the boundaries of political parties. As Danielle stepped down from the podium, she felt as though she had just woken from a dream. But no, this was reality, a reality she had helped shape. Her footsteps echoed on the press room floor, no longer the lonely steps of an unemployed veteran, but steps of hope, of impending change. The next morning, Danielle sat in her small apartment in Columbus, Ohio, feeling as if she had just emerged from a surreal dream. On the TV screen, news channels replayed footage from the previous day's press conference. Her phone buzzed incessantly with hundreds of messages and calls from all over. "A shrewd political move by Trump," a CNN commentator analyzed. "This could be a turning point in how we treat our veterans," someone on Fox News remarked. "Is this just a PR stunt?" questioned a headline on a major newspaper. Danielle picked up her phone and scrolled through the flood of messages. Some were from old friends in the military. "Go get 'em! We're behind you." Others were from strangers. "Don't let them exploit you. Fight for us. We believe in you." She sat by the window gazing out at the city waking up. Just a week ago, she had been an unemployed veteran, desperately searching for an opportunity. Now she had become a symbol of hope for thousands of others. A week after the press conference, Danielle walked into the White House in a new suit, a gift from a local clothing store inspired by her story. It felt surreal to walk through these halls of power, not as a tourist or journalist, but as part of the staff. "Welcome to your first day," Sarah, one of Trump's assistants, greeted her. "The president is waiting for you in the Oval Office." Danielle entered the Oval Office with her heart pounding. Trump was seated at his desk, surrounded by senior advisors. "Ah, Danielle," Trump stood to greet her. "We were just discussing the new job program for veterans. I want you to jump right into this project." Over the next 2 hours, Danielle listened as the advisors presented the existing plans. She quickly realized that while many of them had good intentions, they didn't fully understand the challenges veterans faced. "Mr. President," she finally spoke up, "I think we need a different approach." The room fell silent. The advisors exchanged glances, surprised at the frankness of the newcomer. Go on, Trump nodded. We don't just need to create jobs. We need to build a comprehensive support system. Many veterans don't just need employment, they need retraining, psychological support, and, most importantly, they need to feel respected and valued in the civilian society. The first few weeks in her new role were far from easy for Danielle. She quickly realized that passion and good intentions were not always enough to bring about change in a complex bureaucratic system. We don't have the budget for this, a bureaucrat said when she proposed expanding vocational training programs. This process will take at least 2 years. Another explained when she sought to streamline the job application process for veterans. This isn't a priority for this year, a senator told her while declining a meeting. Despite the obstacles, Danielle's resolve grew stronger. She knew that her battle was no longer just for herself. It was for the countless veterans who needed someone to fight for them. And she wasn't about to back down. Each evening, Danielle returned to her new apartment in Washington, D.C., provided as part of her job, with a heavy heart. She spent hours reading emails and messages from veterans across the country, people who had pinned their hopes on her. I just got rejected for another job, a young veteran wrote. They said my military experience doesn't apply. I served 20 years, another shared. Now they're saying I'm too old to start over. One night, after an especially difficult day filled with meetings that led nowhere, Danielle sat in her small White House office. She pulled out an old photograph, a picture of her unit in Afghanistan. The faces were young, full of energy and unwavering belief in their mission. I can't let you down, she whispered. Suddenly, an idea sparked in her mind. If the system couldn't change from the inside, perhaps she needed to create pressure from the outside. She opened her laptop and began to write. To all veterans, I'm Danielle Carter, and as you know, I'm working at the White House to improve the lives of our community. But I can't do this alone. I need your stories. I need your voices. She sent the email at midnight. By the next morning, her inbox was flooded with thousands of responses. Veterans from all walks of life shared their stories, successes, failures, hopes, and fears. This is the real power, Danielle thought. Not the closed-door meetings, not the policy memos, but the genuine voices of those who had served their country. As she sifted through the responses, Danielle received an unexpected phone call. It was Marcus, her former commanding officer in Afghanistan. I just saw the news about you. His voice rumbled through the line, still as steady and warm as it had been in their military days. You've come a long way from that young soldier I once knew. Danielle smiled, recalling her early days in the military. Marcus had taught her not just about military tactics, but also about courage and perseverance. I don't know if I can do this, sir, she admitted. This system, it's so much more complicated than I ever imagined. Danielle, Marcus said, his tone serious, do you remember our first mission? When the entire unit got stuck in that sandstorm in Afghanistan? How could she ever forget? 3 days in harsh conditions, with no communication and no supplies. Many thought they wouldn't make it out alive. Do you remember what I said back then? In the military, we never leave a teammate behind. Now you're fighting on a different battlefield, but the principle remains the same. Those words struck something deep within Danielle. She remembered the feeling of camaraderie, the absolute trust in the person beside her. Perhaps that was what she needed to bring into her current work. Thank you, sir, she said, her voice choked with emotion. I won't forget that. After the call, Danielle sat down and began to write. Not a policy memo or an action plan, but a letter addressed to all her colleagues at the White House. Dear colleagues, I am not a politician or a policymaker. I am a soldier. And in the military, we are taught one thing: never leave a teammate behind. The letter circulated from desk to desk within the White House. For many, it was the first time they considered veterans' issues not through statistics or reports, but through the perspective of someone who had lived it. That afternoon, a senior assistant to Trump knocked on Danielle's office door. I read your letter, he said. My father was a veteran too. He struggled for years after returning from Vietnam. Maybe we can do something different. Gradually, others started to reach out as well. A senator shared the story of his brother, a veteran who was facing hardships. A Department of Labor official talked about a college friend who had served in Iraq. Danielle realized that to change the system, she first had to change how people viewed the problem. Not as numbers, not as abstract policies, but as real stories about real people. Maybe this is the way, she thought, not by confronting the system, but by helping the system understand our story. After 3 months at the White House, Danielle began to see small but meaningful changes. The emails from veterans across the country became her emotional lifeline. Each success story, no matter how small, was something she treasured. Thanks to the new program, I've landed a job in tech, one veteran wrote. For the first time in years, I feel valued. The job application process is so much simpler now, another shared. I no longer have to spend hours explaining how my military skills apply to civilian work. Danielle realized that change was possible, not all at once, but step by step, driven by the voices of those who had served. And in those moments of progress, however small, she found the strength to keep going. One morning, Trump called Danielle into the Oval Office. On his desk was a thick folder. I read your report, he said, about integrating private companies into the employment program for veterans. It's very impressive. Danielle nodded. It was the result of months of tireless work, building connections with businesses and convincing them of the value veterans could bring to their workforce. But there's a problem, Trump continued, the budget. We'll need Congress to approve a significant amount of funding. The hearing before the Congressional Committee was a completely new challenge for Danielle. Standing in front of the stern faces of the legislators felt almost like her first days in the military. Ms. Carter, one congressman began, your program will cost billions of dollars. How can we be sure it will work? Danielle pulled out a set of documents. Sir, this isn't a cost, it's an investment. Every veteran given a suitable job opportunity contributes back to the economy, reducing the burden on our social welfare system. She paused, looking directly into the eyes of each person in the room. But more importantly, I have a question. When we send young men and women to the battlefield, we promise to take care of them when they return. Are we keeping that promise? The room fell silent. An older congressman, a Vietnam veteran, gave a subtle nod. After 6 months of relentless effort, the bill was finally passed. The Future for Those Who Return program was officially launched nationwide. It encompassed not only employment opportunities but also vocational training, psychological counseling, and housing support. Danielle stood in a newly opened job center in Chicago, watching young veterans being trained in emerging technologies. Among them, she saw a reflection of herself just a year ago, lost and unsure of where to begin. This is just the start, she told a group of reporters. We're not just creating jobs, we're building a community, a support system so that no one is left behind. Trump, during a visit to the center, spent time speaking with the veterans. There were no cameras, no press, just honest conversations about their challenges and hopes for the future. For Danielle, watching those moments of connection was a reminder of why she had started this journey. It wasn't just about policies or programs, it was about people, about giving them a chance to rebuild their lives and find a sense of purpose once again. Danielle, Trump said as they left the center, you've done what many thought was impossible. You turned a moment into a movement. That evening, sitting in her White House office, Danielle wrote in her journal, a year ago, I stood in this press room with a heart full of despair. Today, I see hope in the eyes of my fellow veterans. We still have so much work to do, but at least now we know that our voices are being heard. What I've learned is that change doesn't always come from sweeping policies. Sometimes it starts with small stories, with helping people understand that behind every statistic is a real person with real dreams and aspirations. 5 years after that fateful press conference, Danielle Carter stood on the stage of a national conference on veterans' rights. The auditorium was packed with familiar and new faces, veterans, policymakers, business leaders, and young people preparing to enlist. When I walked into the White House press room 5 years ago, she began her speech, I was just a lone voice. Today we are an army, not to fight wars, but to build a better future for everyone who has served this country. The numbers spoke for themselves. The unemployment rate among veterans had dropped to its lowest point in history. More than 100,000 veterans had been retrained and found jobs through the Future for Those Who Return program. But the most significant success was the shift in societal perception. Sarah Martinez, a young veteran now serving as a technical director at a leading tech company, shared her story with the audience. Before this program, I applied to over 200 companies without a single response. They didn't know how to evaluate my military experience. Now, with the transition training and the network of partner businesses, I've not only found a job but built a career. James Wilson, a veteran with 15 years of service, had started a small business with funding support from the program. We're now hiring other veterans. We understand their value: discipline, loyalty, teamwork. This isn't charity, this is smart business. The program's success extended beyond the borders of the United States. Other countries began studying and adopting the model. Danielle was frequently invited to share her insights at international forums. Looking back, Danielle reflected on the journey that had started with a single question in a press room and transformed into a movement. It wasn't just about jobs or programs. It was about restoring dignity, building community, and creating a future where no veteran would be left behind. As she closed her speech, she looked out at the audience and said, "This movement is proof of what we can accomplish when we come together, not as individuals but as a united front. Let's continue to write the story of hope, strength, and a future worthy of those who have served." The room erupted into applause, but Danielle knew the work was far from over. The battle for progress was ongoing, but for the first time in years, the future felt brighter. Not just for her, but for veterans everywhere. "The most important lesson we've learned," Danielle said during a speech at the United Nations, "is that integrating veterans into civilian society is not solely the responsibility of governments. It's a collective effort requiring the participation of the entire society, from businesses to schools, from local communities to non-governmental organizations." In her new office at the National Center for Veteran Support, Danielle gazed out the window at Washington, D.C. On the wall hung a photograph of her and Trump at that fateful press conference, surrounded by hundreds of other pictures, moments that marked the extraordinary journey she had undertaken. "We've come a long way," Trump had said during their most recent phone call, "but I know you won't stop here." He was right. Danielle was preparing for the next phase, a new initiative focused on mental health and family support for veterans. She understood that the road ahead was still long. Danielle Carter's story is not just the story of a veteran finding her voice. It's a story about the power of courage, about how one individual can create meaningful change by standing up for what's right. And perhaps that is the most important message this story delivers. It's never too late to make a difference. No one is too small to have an impact. Every voice matters and every action counts. Dear reader, the story of Danielle Carter and her extraordinary journey has reached its conclusion, but this is not the end, because each of us has the potential to be a Danielle Carter in our own field. What do you think about this story? Does it spark something within you? Perhaps a desire to create change, a yearning to improve something in your community, or simply the inspiration to take that first step? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Every story, every perspective is valuable and could inspire someone else to take action. Don't forget to hit like if this story touched your heart and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next inspiring stories. Because each of us has the power to create change. It only takes one voice, it only takes one action, it only takes one person willing to stand up.